What is metabolic syndrome? What leads to this proliferation of these metabolic diseases? How are they all interrelated?
Cool. So the metabolic syndrome is like an actual classification of 5 different conditions that have been shown in the evidence-based research to increase your risk for chronic disease and lower your lifespan. And I'm just going to pull up the actual. I always get them mixed up, and I always like interchange the 5 of them. So while I'm pushing, here we go. Number 1, low HDL cholesterol. Okay, we can talk a lot about HDL because it's very important. So if you have low HDL cholesterol, then you technically have one of the 5 conditions within the metabolic syndrome realm. Number 2, high triglycerides. Number 3, high blood glucose, and that is a high fasting blood glucose. Number 4, high blood pressure. And then number 5, a large waistline, aka a waistline that would put you into the overweight or obese category. So the name of the game here is trying to identify, do you have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of these conditions, or I should say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of these conditions. The goal is to have 0. And the goal is not only to have 0, but to pass as much time with 0 as possible, right? So if your life started at age 0 and goes to age 95, the question becomes how many of those years can you pass where your risk for chronic disease is extremely low because you have a minimal number of these conditions or you have 0 of these conditions. And that's kind of like the way I like to think about improving your health in the long term, because the things that you do today definitely matter, but the things that you do today and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and keep going over the course of time are actually what's going to improve your health in the long term.
Right. And so these 5 basically conditions, which are risk factors for chronic diseases like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, autoimmune disease, neurodegenerative disease, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, etc. Right. If you have one or more of these, then these are basically underlying, I'd say markers. I mean underlying conditions, but certainly underlying markers to say, hey, I'm on a path towards one or more of these other chronic diseases. And if we can get these things under control and into a healthy level, right, whether it's excess body weight or excess body fat, I should say, or, HDL or any of the other things that, high fasting, glucose, insulin, any of these things, we want to get to a healthy range. And so these are things that we should be testing regularly. What are your thoughts on that?
I was actually going to say, can I share my screen? Because I just got the results of my most recent blood test today, a few hours before this conversation. And the results are awesome, but there's also something surprising on here, which I would love to show you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Can you see my screen right now?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. So my lipid panel is shown right here. Okay, so the first thing that you look at when you take a look at your lipid panel is what's called your total cholesterol. So according to the medical guidelines, your cholesterol should be less than 200. So you can see right here, anything over 200 is considered red, anything under 200 is considered good. Okay, my total cholesterol is 87, which I was like, great, that's exactly what I expect it to be, right? According to the research that circulates within the whole food plant-based sphere, 200 is too high. I would not use 200 as a personal guideline for whether or not my cholesterol level is high. I would use 150 as the threshold between a reasonable total cholesterol and a elevated total cholesterol. Okay, so again, mine is 87 and my cutoff would be 150. The second one we're looking at is triglycerides. Triglycerides has a threshold of 150. My triglycerides are 45. Okay, so that means that I'm well underneath the threshold for elevations, and that's a good thing. Okay. The most important one on your lipid panel is right here. It's called your LDL cholesterol. Where's my LDL? Right here. Your LDL cholesterol, this is the biomarker that actually is associated with an increased risk of heart disease more than any other biomarker within your lipid panel. In other words, If your LDL cholesterol is greater than 100, you significantly increase your risk for heart disease into the future or for a future cardiac event. So it is very, very, very important to make sure this LDL cholesterol number is less than 100, hopefully closer to 70. Mine came in at 41, and I was like, fantastic, that's really cool. I am actually learning that my family, for some reason, has a genetic predisposition, we believe, to very low LDL cholesterol, and that's always a good thing. So, okay, now, you guys see on the screen right here, look at my HDL cholesterol. My HDL cholesterol is actually 33. So the cutoff for a male is 40. My HDL cholesterol should be, technically speaking, 40 or greater. And so according to the standards for whether or not I am at risk for metabolic syndrome, this actually means that I have one of the 5 metabolic syndrome characteristics. And this is actually fascinating to me because this is something that has never been true before. I don't think my HDL has been this low. But there's another thing to think about. Your HDL being less than 40 is a guideline that's given for the general population. And the general population is for, generally speaking, people who tend to be overweight, people who tend to be relatively sedentary, and people who tend to be at risk for many chronic diseases. So if your HDL cholesterol is lower than 40, then that poses a significant risk if you don't have an optimal lifestyle. But in the low-fat plant-based in the plant-based world, there are a lot of experts, and Nathan, I'd love to get your take on this as well. There's a lot of experts who say, you know what? Don't worry if your HDL cholesterol is less than 40 for a man or less than 50 for a woman, because what really matters is taking a look at your entire lipid panel in entirety. Okay, so even if your HDL cholesterol is low, what you also want to look at is your LDL cholesterol. So if your LDL cholesterol is very low, then that's a good thing. In other words, if there's less garbage right here, the 41, that means that there's less need for garbage trucks, because the HDL is really considered a cholesterol transport that pulls cholesterol out of your blood. So I have been told that this number is not actually something that I have to worry about, and that's a good thing, but it's all based on the fact that every other aspect of my lipid panel is in good shape. Nathan, you tell me, have you heard similar reasoning from your end?
I was just looking at a article from the NIH that says, the latest research says that the levels of HDL cholesterol may not be as important as much as they used to think it was. Mm-hmm. And so those lower numbers aren't. Here, I'll put a link in the chat for anyone who wants to read this afterwards. But yeah, it's, obviously these things, science is continuously evolving, and that's something we want to remember, right?
Right.
Any guidelines is that, look, there's foundations, there's principles, there's things that have shown to be true over decades and even, centuries, really, when it comes to diet and lifestyle. And there are things that prove again and again and again and again, like if you exercise 1 hour a day versus 0 hours a day, you're going to be significantly healthier than someone who doesn't exercise at all.
Correct.
1 hour a day versus 0. And that's like across the board. And that will most guaranteed 99.9% never change, right? Where someone who exercises 1 hour a day versus 0 hour days is not going to be healthier, right? Like we just know that, we see it, you see it again and again and again and again in every study, in every, situation. Versus when they're, trying to understand these different biomarkers and different cholesterols and different, lipoproteins and, all these kinds of things. It's like we're learning more and more as we go. And so where they thought, if HDL was too low or too high, you're going to have this higher risk. And now they're like, well, it's actually not that important.
Right.
Important is, these other levels that we need to look at, like LDL or total cholesterol or these kinds of things, or
correct,
the foods you're putting in your body. Are they processed? Are they filled with chemicals and preservatives, or are they actually filled with nutrients and fiber and, health promoting food, nutrition? So anyway, I find that really interesting as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I fully agree with you in that it's like a moving target, right? The medical guidelines are based off of, they're supposed to be based off of extensive research. and not just sort of like a, general guideline as to whether or not you could be healthy in a given scenario. But as more science evolves, these, the guidelines sometimes can change. So the last thing I'll say here is that, okay, fine. So let's just say that Cyrus has one strike against him because his HDL cholesterol is low, right? So that means the good cholesterol is low. If you take a look at the entirety of the lipid panel, you'll see, again, the cholesterol to HDL-C ratio, which right here is a marker for insulin resistance, is actually low, which is good. Total cholesterol, low. Triglycerides, low. LDL, low. There's two things that I want to draw your attention to right here. It's called non-HDL cholesterol. So basically, think about it this way. Doctors have recognized that you can't look at any one of these biomarkers in isolation and try and make a conclusion based off of it, because you have to interpret everything together. The non-HDL cholesterol is an attempt to try and basically say, like, hey, let's take a look at everything that could be what's called atherogenic, everything that could be increase your risk for heart disease, and put it into one metric, and that one metric is called non-HDL cholesterol. So this is actually the one that really matters. And so now doctors are like, okay, cool, let's just pay attention to non-HDL cholesterol. And again, this one shows very low because I'm supposed to be under 130, which is a good thing. And then there's another marker right here called apolipoprotein B, and this right here is a protein that is on specific lipoprotein molecules that is associated with an increased risk for heart disease. And again, this one also shows low, right? So the point here is that every aspect of my lipid health is actually in pretty good status, except for the fact that my LDL cholesterol is low. And I'm going to go consult with a couple of different cardiologists and just ask them for their opinion and tell me, is this something that I should worry about? But I don't seem to be concerned at this moment in time.